Let's do in the news, all right? New World Order, here you go. So, this is chaos in the streets, Portland civil unrest, the sign of what is to come. There's something, the seams are starting to come loose in America. Nobody should want to see Americans beating the daylights out of other Americans in our city streets, but it's starting to happen with an alarming regularity. Americans have become more radicalized politically than ever before. And there is certainly nothing wrong with being passionate about what you believe, but way too often these very strong feelings are leading to outbursts of anger and violence. The left hates the right, and the right hates the left, people say. And the mainstream media and many of our leading politicians are having a good old time stirring up the pot on a continual basis. It's almost as if they actually want violence to happen. For a very long time, many of us have been warning that civil unrest is coming to America, and now it's here. A demonstration billed as a march for law and order in the streets of Portland descended into chaos as rival factions broke into bloody brawls downtown Saturday night. Members of the right-wing group Patriot Prayer and their black-clad adversaries known as Antifa, and Antifa is the worst thing on this planet, by the way, used bear spray, bare fists, and batons to thrash each other outside Kelly's Olympian, a popular bar on Southwest Washington Street. The melee, which lasted more than a minute, ended with riot cops rushing in and firing pepper balls at the street fighters. In addition to the weapons mentioned above, it's now been confirmed that some of the combatants were armed with firearms themselves and knives. Videos show the first punches being thrown, which quickly escalated to chaos that spilled onto the streets. Police now confirm that the demonstrators used pepper spray and were armed with hard-knuckled gloves and firearms, batons, and knives. In less than a minute, anti-riot police appeared on the scene using foam bullets to control the crowd. It seems inevitable as these brawls continue to become even more bloody that people are going to start getting shot and stabbed at these things. And it isn't just the West Coast that this kind of thing is happening. Over the weekend, members of Antifa brutally vandalized the Metropolitan Republican Club in New York City. Antifa just handed the Republican Party yet another messaging victory that will only help propel the simmering backlash to the leftist mob rule. And the leftists are ruling by a mob, no matter what you hear on TV. They are having a mob rule. In a gesture that was intended to put New York City Republicans on notice, members of Antifa vandalized the Metropolitan Republican Club building located on New York's Upper East Side, breaking windows and doors and defacing the facade with anarchist symbols, according to the New York Times. It goes on to say this, for example, just consider what the former Attorney General Eric Holder said. As Democrats approach midterms, and more importantly, 2020 U.S. election, former Attorney General Eric Holder had some advice on a Sunday campaign event in Georgia. Michelle Obama always says, he said, when they go low, we go high. No, no, no. When they go low, we kick them. And Hillary Clinton herself just stated that it's not possible to be civil with the Republican Party. She doesn't think that it's possible to be civil with any of us who are Republicans or any of you who are Republicans. Every time this woman opens her mouth, she offends half the country. That's right. She does it all the time. Holder isn't the only leading Democrat calling for aggressive action against conservatives. In this Tuesday interview, Hillary Clinton rejected the idea that Democrats should be civil with Republicans in an age of Donald Trump. You can't be civil with a political party that wants to destroy what you stand for and what you care about. What happened to America when we can disagree? You can disagree with me. I don't have to kill you because you disagree with me. There's people who disagree with me all the time. Thomas Jefferson, I showed you the quote last week. He said that he's never lost a friend because he's disagreed with him. You can disagree with someone and still be free. You don't have to kill them. What's happening in the left, and specifically the left, because they're mob-oriented, they are making it a personal affront every time you disagree with them. So if you disagree with them, they want to hurt you. What happened to civility? What happened to the American way? It's really getting pretty bad, and we're starting to see civil unrest. And let me tell you who's directly responsible about it. Forget the parties. Who's responsible is the media. Yeah. The liberal media is fueling it, and they're hurting America big time. This is the picture that came out that happened over the weekend. Let me give you this one. Growing number of witches. This is a shocking article that I read today. Growing number of witches and the upcoming hex on Justice Kavanaugh. I mean, this is getting worse and worse. Black magic is making headlines as a group of actual witches have been bold enough to publicize a planned hex on Brett Kavanaugh on October 20th in New York City. Even bolder, those practicing demonic rituals and perverse magical rites no longer feel public condemnation in our postmodern society. Could there be a clearer sign of a Christian nation that's lost its way? Witchcraft has existed within Western civilization for millennia as a broad collection of practices ranging from pagan mysticism to demonic magic practiced by witches who draw their power from the devil. As the 20th century drew to a close, though, the number of self-identified witches had steadily fallen in the United States and was estimated at just about 8,000 in the early 1900s. But that's no longer true. In the 21st century, it brought a resurgence of occult practices and resulted in a community of at least 340,000 Wiccans by 2008, and around the same number of pagans as well. So a total of about 680,000 witches or Wiccans. The Pew Research Foundation has continued the work of Trinity College and provided a broad estimate that put the number of Wiccans and pagans between 1 and 1.5 million in 2014. This frightening fast growth of witches in the United States is believed to have continued to expand to fill the spiritual void left by Christianity's losses among the millennial generation. And let me just go on the church here for a moment. When you preach money, 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 money for decades, people start to lose interest in something that's not supposed to be about money.
That's right.
So the church is to blame, in my opinion, because the church has made merchandise of people, and what's happened is they've lost the desire to go to church because they don't want to be made merchandise of. Well, they're fleeing to pagan practices. It's telling that practicing witches is estimated up to 1.5 million, now outnumber, listen to this, the 1.4 million members of the mainline Presbyterian Church. There's more witches in America than there are Presbyterians. And their ranks continue to swell and gain recognition in society, even as the church struggles to maintain itself. Witchcraft proper, though dating back to some form thousands of years ago, saw a significant evolution in the mid-20th century with the Wicca label that replaced the belief system as a pre-Christian paganism centered on earth worship and nature spiritually. In New York City, this October 20th, we will witness how the Me Too movement, listen, has now intersected with the feminist facade of the truly satanic subset of witchcraft that has proliferated in American society. We're watching these things blend together. It's on this day that a group of witches has announced this public gathering to place a hex on the new Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh. The anti-male group of female witches declare their intentions in a public statement that declares this: "We are embracing witchcraft's true roots as the magic of the poor, downtrodden, and defranchised, and its history as often is the only weapon, the only means of exacting justice available to those of us who have been wronged by men just like him." It invites others to attend it as it promises to attack the powerful and perverse in society. Here's a quote: "Please join us for a public hex on Brett Kavanaugh upon all rapists and the patriarchy at large, which emboldens, rewards, and protects them. Already more than 1,100 have pledged to attend as participants, with an additional 11,000 potential attendees, according to the Facebook page for the event." By the way, the Bible is unambiguous in its warning and prohibitions about witchcraft, and we ignore these words of caution at our peril. Satan tempts mankind with the promise of personal power derived from a source other than Almighty God. So the hallmark of the last days is deception. And one of its main manifestations among so many mainline Protestant churches is this new fascination with the occult. It is an inevitable consequence when Christ has literally been forsaken and replaced by the devil. And society, in hundreds of thousands of cases, doesn't bat an eye. Justice Kavanaugh isn't the first, nor will he be the last political figure to incur their wrath. So what they do is they take something that may be true or may not be true. We know that there's sexual abuse, which has been happening since day one. I mean, come on, since day one on the planet it's been happening. But they're taking it, the feminists are running with it, and they're male bashing, and now they're joining with feminists that are witches, and they're getting together and they have a cause. You know, we live in a day where everybody has a cause.
That's right.
And everybody's cause is the greatest cause, and you're the worst worm if you're not part of that cause. So I'm sure there's been people talking to me or going to email me again, and you keep doing it because I'm going to continue to stand up for the biblical principles of God. Not the world society, but the biblical principles. Amen. We talk about Israel. This is happening today. Pompeo, he is doing this, speaking at the Grand Hyatt downtown in Washington. He was speaking to the Jewish Institute for National Security of America. With senators and diplomats in the audience, the secretary hinted at a plan that would offer the Palestinians a state, a word only recently introduced into U.S. President Donald Trump's lexicon when he ordered endorsed a two-state solution to the storied conflict last month. "We are making a truly historic push for peace between Israel and the Palestinians," Pompeo told the crowd. "The peace plan, designed by Jared Kushner and Jason Greenblatt, over the course of nearly 2 years will be released before long, and we are hopeful that both sides will have a constructive conversations to lead to that." Let me give you my opinion. And I'll go against the Trump administration right here. There is no such thing as a two-state solution. and I want you to know that. Two states will never work in Israel. It hasn't worked. Every time we've given anything to the Palestinians have used it to try to take Israel down. And so basically a two-state solution is really a joke. And I want you to know that. And I hope it's not part of the peace plan, because it does not work. The Arabs, the Islamic Arabs under Israeli occupation live far better than when they live under Hamas or Hezbollah. And that's proven right now as we're speaking, right now. So we'll give you some more on that. Israel and the so-called social justice is the next one that came in. And so everything is Israel is illegal. These are protesting. And by the way, they have the right to protest. They have freedom of speech. We're losing it in America, but they still have it in this democracy. Social justice warriors and progressives were berserk this week when Israel exercised its right as any sovereign nation to determine who enters its borders. It barred an anti-Israeli American student from entering the country and ordered her deported over alleged support for anti-Israeli boycott efforts. They have the right to do that. If somebody's a terror against the state, you have the right to say you can't come in here. We have it, and so do they. There are a few places on earth whose very mention causes anger hives to break out, rivers of rage to flow, and violent marches of madness to occur, like one small country on the eastern shore of the Mediterranean Sea, Israel. Isn't it amazing that there is more time devoted by supposed human rights groups, United Nations resolutions, and other so-called freedom movements on this country than all of the other countries on the earth combined? Palestinians are dying in refugee camps in Syria and denied access to jobs, civil rights, and equality under every Arab country. This movement is more concerned with disrupting music festivals that feature Jews or Israelis using massive intimidation, threats, bullying, and intense social media campaigns. They're not worried about their Arab relatives that are facing persecution in Arab nations. They only want to go against Israel. So naturally, they'll dismiss these claims that they are anti-Semitic, yet that is easily debunked, such as when they targeted Jewish singer Metasahu at a Spanish music festival, threatening him and the festival organizers if he played, and he isn't even Israeli, he's just Jewish. Boycott, BDS it's called, Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, is a group more interested in taking cherry tomatoes off supermarket shelves than helping ordinary Palestinians feed and take care of themselves. Every success of theirs means the more suffering for those ordinary Arabs who are just trying to make a living. So we're watching that happen, and it's continuing to grow in fervency. Let me give you a little bit about the economy. I've been beating this horse for a long, long time, and I can't stop because the articles keep coming out. Are we headed for a cashless rural society? This is talking about England. And by the way, Europe, we're a couple years behind Europe, but just listen to what's happening here. How we pay for goods and services and how we access cash are changing rapidly with rural consequences in England, finds Brian Wilson. The continuing closure of bank branches, along with recent evidence about the loss of cash machines, ATMs, is building into a significant news story about accessing cash. It is one that has implicated both the households and the businesses, and one that has a significant rural dimension. September, 757 bank branches have either closed down or are planning to close down during 2018 in Britain. By far the largest closure programs this year are in order, those by Royal Bank of Scotland, NatWest, and Lloyds of London. This means that 2,961 bank branches have closed down over the last 4 years at an average rate of 60 per month. And so what's happening is, even though there may be some people who say, well, I don't want to lose the ability to use cash, what's happening is we're not going to be able to, because you can't go into an ATM, you can't go into a branch office because they're closing them all down. And so it's being forced upon us. It's not something that we're willingly doing, it's being forced upon us. And it's happening, and it's happening very quickly. Let me give you a little bit also that went on with religion this week. Now look at this picture. This is Mona Lisa Abdo. She's a Christian, she's an Arab, she's a soldier, she's an Israeli. Most people don't understand that. You can be an Arab Israeli. She is an Arab Christian Israeli. It means that she has an Israeli citizenship, and she serves in the army. So we're watching some weird things happening about all of this, and it's about the Christians in Israel. She's a rarity. She didn't used to be. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke to a Christian media summit in Jerusalem this past Sunday and uttered something that was incontrovertibly true. He said this: Israel is the only country that protects the human rights of everyone. We protect the religious rights of everyone. We don't just protect Christian sites, we protect Christian people. Christians should enjoy all the freedoms to worship as they please in the Middle East. That's a big statement. And anywhere else. And the only place in the Middle East where they can do that is Israel. We have no better friend in the world than our Christian friends, Netanyahu said. As further proof, he cited the fact that what has happened in Bethlehem, which is a city that Christians once dominated. Bethlehem used to have 80% of Christians. Just listen to it. The turning point was Israel's 1995 handover of the area to the Palestinian Authority. Before the Palestinian Authority got Bethlehem, there was 80% Christians in Bethlehem. Yasser Arafat's wife was a Christian. And so there were 80% Christians prior to 1995. Only 23 years later, its population is now 80% Muslim. They're pushing out Christians everywhere. Bethlehem Mayor Anton Salman denounced the Prime Minister's comments. He said the problem was entirely Israel's fault, citing 50 years of occupation that had negatively affected Arab life in the territories. But of course, Salman has no answers to why Christian population in Bethlehem and the entire West Bank should collapse under PA rule at the same time that we're told that the overall Arab population continues to grow at astonishing high rates. The reason is no secret. Though the Fatah party of both Yasser Arafat and Muhammad Abbas is routinely described as a secular alternative to the Islamists of Hamas, it also treats Islam as the state religion and it bullies religious minorities. What's happening is Christians are being pushed out of the West Bank and of Bethlehem. It used to be all controlled by Christians. 80%, the West Bank, 80%. Arab Christians were very numerous in those areas. The remnants of Christian living under Palestinian rule have no choice but to echo Muslim propaganda against Israel. So here's what's happening. This is why I put this up. So you have Arab Christians who are actually echoing things against Israel because they associate with their Arab neighbors who are Islamic because they're Arabs. But they're the same ones, the Islamics, that are pushing them out. You can see this quagmire, this back and forth that's going on. While Israel's not perfect, Netanyahu is right when he says that it's the only place in the Middle East where Christians and Christian communities can thrive. That's why the overwhelming majority of American Christians regard Israel with affection rooted in shared values about religious freedom. They also need to realize that the Palestinian Authority and Hamas are enemies of those values and the future of Christianity in the Holy Land. So it's kind of interesting. But talking about Christians, let me share a couple other things that you won't hear on nightly news. Christians sentenced to death under Sharia law. So I won't give you the whole thing, but violence and persecution against Christians have, under the Sharia law of Iran, increased significantly. One recent case documents the traumatic experience of Pastor Victor Bet Tamraz and his wife Shemariam Isavar, ethnic Assyrian Christians, along with Ann Ashfar Naderi and Hadi Agasa, who converted to Christianity from Islam. Each were sentenced to the Revolutionary Court in Tehran to a combined total of 45 years in prison. Despite Iran's claims that they have equal rights and protections, they will never see freedom again. What terrible crime must they have committed to warrant such a harsh punishment? Surely it had to be more than simply being Christians. After all, the president of Iran made it clear that Christians enjoy equal rights. He said that. The ambiguous charges they faced included vague terms such as conducting illegal church activities and threatening national security. Even though Christians make up a very small part of the population, they have always been viewed under Iran's Sharia law as a threat to national security. So Iran's total population, by the way, is about 80 million. Only 117,000 are Christian, and they're being persecuted. The latest report from Amnesty International pointed out that Christians in Iran have been a target of harassment, arbitrary arrest and detention, unfair trials, imprisonment on national security-related charges solely because of their faith. Yet atrocities against them continue, and the world doesn't do anything about it. Speaking about the world not doing anything about it, where is the UN with the atrocities that are being done in this country? Myanmar. You know what Myanmar is? It used to be called Burma. The world press, the United Nations, even Pope have closely followed the campaign in Myanmar of the genocide of ethnic Muslims, but there has been little coverage given to the persecution and execution of Christians within Myanmar. A group known as the United WA State Army has carried out the destruction of 3 churches in addition to the seizure and stripping of 52 more churches this year, and still holding 92 Christian pastors hostage as they agree to sign a pledge not to practice their religion. The USWA is the military ruling party now in charge of the WA state and is also the area's largest ethnic group. But its efforts against Christians are taking place in neighboring Shah state. The Lahu Baptist Convention, based in eastern Shan state, has published accounts of forcible recruiting of at least 41 students by the UWSA. The abductions of both young men and women happened in Bible study classes, in churches. The areas in which the USWA is conducting its campaign of repression are now cut off, and travel is difficult to impossible. Christians living in this area are being persecuted and killed. Their churches are being shut down. They're fleeing. Here's where Myanmar is, by the way. It's right underneath China. There's Myanmar. And so it's between India and Thailand. And they're purging Christians out of that area. This is exactly what's happening in Iran. So we're seeing it going on and on. Officials have issued an outright ban on Christians assembling or praying in churches. And in the city of Mongpao, while officials warn Christians not to practice their faith even at home. Boy, I want somebody to tell me I can't practice my faith at home. I'll tell you what, I'll practice at home more, and I'll practice out in the streets. So the world is ignoring it. So if you want to help the Christians of Myanmar, pray and spread the word. Let people know that Christians are suffering from repression, that it's fast approaching a genocide. If enough people wake up now, if enough eyes are on the UWSA and Myanmar military, maybe the killings can be averted, but it's coming in mass to the Christians that are living there. Let me give you something else that comes under moral decay. You still with me tonight? All right. This is interesting. It's happening in our colleges. Christian apologists to faith-based colleges and universities are struggling with increasing pressure from homosexual activists to abandon biblical morality. So I won't read you all this. It's Pepperdine University. It's Biola University. These are all Christian universities. The Azusa Pacific University in California. What they're doing is they're getting pressure from all these homosexual activists to include in their program something that welcomes homosexuals. Now these are Christian colleges. They have statements of faith that are not unlike a statements of faith from a church, talking about you have to practice Christianity to be part of these colleges. Well, the caveat here is this: they're getting money from the state, and they're getting money from the government. And so the colleges are rewriting their programs, they're rewriting their requirements, and they're including all kinds of things that have to do with homosexual activism and LGBT. And so we're seeing colleges start to buckle because of money. You know what? The colleges need to get together and say, we're not going to take any more money from the government, but we're going to stand up for our rights. Listen, they need to remember what prompted their founding in the first place. Christian education is predicated on the belief that God and His Word are the starting place for knowledge and wisdom. When we lose that, you can call yourself a Christian college, but you're really just a mainline college. Let me give you something else. Not that there's too much more to give you that can shock you, but this is coming. This is the next big one, preparing for a global pandemic. For some reason, I've been in a bunch of symposiums in the last couple of months talking about pandemics. I don't know how I got there. They're all secular, but I got there. And it's pretty interesting because these are secular people talking about this pandemic. And this came out today. 100 years ago, the world struggled against the relentless enemy, H1N1, also known as the Spanish flu. Rising from the trenches of World War I, it spread to every corner of the globe in 1918 and 1919, even remote Pacific islands. What made it especially deadly is that more than half of its victims were healthy adults between the ages of 20 and 40. The virus turned their healthy immune systems against them. They died terrible, gruesome deaths. When the global pandemic finally came to an end, it had taken more lives than the Great World War itself. Estimates say between 50 and 100 million people died. It's about 6% of the world population back then. Ebola and other diseases we've seen, but we've avoided a global pandemic since 1918. By the way, all the symposiums I went to said that you'll have epidemics, about 3 in a century, and you'll have a pandemic every 200 years. But they're taking that down, way down, and let me tell you why. A couple things have happened. We now have better knowledge about diseases and about the flu and viruses and bacteria. If you've got a flu shot, by the way, that flu shot is actually a vaccine from last year's flu. And so they can't give you this year's flu. They don't know what kind of strain's coming. So it's effective because of last year's flu. Last year, the flu mutated, and a lot of people who got the flu shot got a mild form of the flu because it mutated. So here's what's happening. So we haven't had a pandemic, which wipes out a lot of the people on the planet, but we're headed for one for a couple reasons. First off, world travel. One reason our luck, this says, is going to run out is our love for international travel. Crossing borders today is more common than it was a century ago. Past generations didn't travel like we do. So the 1918 flu, people weren't traveling as much as we do. Now we travel everywhere. According to the World Bank data, since 1970 alone, the number of airline passengers carried has increased more than 12-fold, from 310 million passengers to 3.98 billion passengers. Even people who don't travel the globe often commute on vacation over long distances. All this travel makes the spread of disease much more likely. and more likely for an outbreak. And then there's the threat of mutating viruses. Here's what's happened. Since the 1918 pandemic, our knowledge of the flu has vastly increased. We come up with all these vaccines, and we come up with all the things. We have plans and procedures for outbreaks. We have antiviral drugs for treatment, but vaccines aren't perfect. We make them based on what the flu strains we think will strike in any given year, as I said. Because of this, their effectiveness varies wildly. The flu is constantly adapting, and new strains can jump from animals to humans. Because of this, that's the flu. There's a type A and type B. There's also a type C that they're just waiting to jump from animals. It's impossible to develop a single vaccine to stop the flu. Further complicating matters, some strains can easily move from one infected person to another. For example, in 1918, Spanish flu affected 1/3 of the people on the planet. 1/3 it infected. Fortunately, it killed only 1 in 10 people. Had it been 1 in 3 or 1 in 2, we would have had more millions, tens of millions that would have been added to that. Last winter, more than 80,000 Americans died from the flu. And let me correct this. You don't die from the flu. What you die from is pneumonia. You get the flu, you think you're getting better. Basically, you start to do more work around your house and start going back to work, and then you relapse. When you relapse, pneumonia sets in, and that's what kills people. So, while the threat of devastating, here's the other thing that they're worried about, superbacteria. See, we've been treating things with antibiotics, and our antibiotics are wiping out the weak bacteria and allowing the strong ones to remain. So we are setting ourselves up. And a lot of times, the things, that bacteria that we fight with antibiotics will not be able to be fought because we're exhausting our antibiotics. So can you say pestilence? This is exactly what Jesus talked about in the last days. In all of our technology, pestilence may be right there. So how many are ready for some good news? None of us have the flu. That's good news. No, let me give you this one. You ready for it? Here you go. LGBT activists overplay their hand. My last article. A win in the courts for religious freedom. It's rare that you see this, but it happened. On January 9, 2015, this article writer wrote this. The mayor of Atlanta declares war on religious freedom. Now, more than 3.5 years later, sanity has prevailed and religious freedoms have been preserved. Atlanta must pay up. This is great news. Listen to it. The case involved Fire Chief Kelvin Cochran, a man who had served the city of Atlanta for more than 30 years, working with distinction without blemish. But when he self-published a 160-page book for use in his home church, gay activists rose up against him, demanding that he be fired. On his own time and his own dime, he dared to write a book which contained a few lines, yes, just a few lines, speaking against homosexual practices. And note that he spoke also against other sexual sins as well, as mentioned in Scripture. According to Cochran, he did this with proper clearance from his authorities, even given a copy to the mayor, who Cochran claims promised to read it. But at the behest of the LGBT activists, Cochran was first suspended for 30 days without pay, seriously, ordered to go to sensitivity training. Then he was fired. To add insult to the injury and madness to the circus, Mayor Kasim Reed then explained that Cochran was fired because, quote, we will not discriminate on the basis of race or gender or religion or creed or sexual orientation or physical ability or gender identity. This is a line to make George Orwell proud. Because we will not discriminate based on religion, we are firing you because of your religious beliefs. That's right. Thankfully, sanity has prevailed and religious liberty has been preserved. As the Daily Wire reported, Atlanta is to pay out $1.2 million to Christian fire chief after violating his First Amendment rights. You have rights, you have beliefs. It's okay that they believe any way they want to believe, but don't let them stymie you. You can have beliefs. They can't fire you for your beliefs. So the initial ruling in Cochran's favor came back in December of 2017. Now the city council agreed to pay out $1.2 million to the former chief for damages and attorney fees. Cochran was represented by the ADF, which has been on the front lines of major religious freedom victories in recent years. In the words of ADF attorney Kevin Thierout, the government can't force its employees to get its permission before they engage in free speech. Free speech is part of your constitutional rights. It also can't fire them for exercising that First Amendment freedom, causing them to lose both their freedom and their livelihoods. Precisely. The outrage is that this happened in the first place. This should never have happened. The outrage is that anyone that thought they had the power or the right to terminate Cochran for his biblically based religious beliefs. And remember, at no point was there a single charge of discrimination brought against him. In other words, he treated all his employees and colleagues in a proper and professional manner. The issue was what he believed about homosexual practice. And the city of Atlanta had the gall to tell him, if you hold to these beliefs and express these beliefs, you can't work for us. To repeat, that's a constitutional outrage. You can believe anything you want, and you can spread anything you believe. It's your right as an American. We lose that. Listen, but around the world, similar outrages are occurring. I am really thankful that Atlanta's got to cough up $1.2 million. Amen. That's our in the news for tonight. Amen.